Welcome to Scenario D,
the podcast that takes you behind the magic by giving you the facts and a whole lot of feels.
I'm Lish.
And I'm Kirbs.
And this week we're heading into the forest to find the little prince himself, Bambi. So grab a furry friend.
And even more tissues, because apparently animal moms don't make it out alive in Disney films.
As we dig into one of the most beloved Disney films of all time. Okay, Kirbs.
I just have to, okay, for the listeners at home. We just sat here staring at each other for about 15 seconds because neither one of us had agreed that we were going to start.
Yeah, usually we kind of say oh, I've got something to start us off, and we forgot to do that this time.
And I even thought earlier, I'm pointing at my head as if I need to be illustrating everything with an action. But I even thought earlier, it's do I have something I could start with? And I was like, no, I don't even really like this movie. Why would I be starting? And yet then here I am, the one in a Bambi shirt.
You are wearing a Bambi shirt, yeah.
Wearing the Prince of the Forest. Shout out to Robert if you're listening. This is the shirt you gave me. Thank you so much.
It's really cute.
Many times.
It's really cute.
Really cute.
Yeah.
And Bambi's really cute. I just, watching it last night, found myself thinking, it's so pretty, and yet I'm so bored. It's nice to have on in the background. I like it there. If I was sick, I think it would be a great one.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of comforting. The music's beautiful. Mm-hmm. It looks great. But I'm not interested in this baby deer.
I get that. I mean, for me, it's definitely one that I put on in the background for the reasons that you said. It's a really beautiful film. I really do like the music in it. It doesn't really... you can just kind of have it on. It's not a high involvement type of movie. So yeah. I mean, I agree with you. It is a bit more on the boring side, but I do also find it very charming for some. There's just something about it that I really like, and I'm kind of drawn to a bit more so than Dumbo, for example.
Dumbo, yeah. And after watching Dumbo last week and Bambi this week, I can firmly say that I still hold by having Dumbo much higher in my rankings than Bambi, because both films have a lot of the same ingredients. I'm just more drawn to Sweet Dumbo and those pink elephants than I am to Bambi and his bumbling ways. Can't figure anything out.
I loved, and this is something that I kind of noticed more this time because I was watching it very much more intentional, that his mom, when she dies, she's just run, Bambi, keep running, don't stop. And then he's kind of treating Feline the same with the dogs. He's just jump, get out of here. And it's just that sacrifice was made for him. And then now he's kind of that, I don't know, that kind of hit me a little bit this time for sure.
Yeah. I definitely only started liking Bambi once he had a brain that functioned. I don't know why it bothered me
find
so much
him
that
so
this little
cute.
baby Bambi. Oh, he is.
Yeah.
He's adorable. But for some reason, I don't know what kind of headspace I was in yesterday, but I was this bumbling baby Bambi can't even stand up on his own.
It's his first time on his legs, Kirbs. Give him
a
break.
But giraffes literally fall 4 feet to the ground and then just stand up. And Bambi can't get it together. You know, I'm just
we
saying.
can't all be a giraffe, Kirbs.
Why is Thumper so much smarter than Bambi? Is he so much older? He can't be. They don't live that long. Things just not adding up. You know?
Well, Thumper wasn't eating his vegetables, so I don't know how smart Thumper really is.
I mean, how smart is Thumper?
Thumper
really?
was all talk.
Thumper really is all talk. I forgot how much I like Friend Owl, the owl.
Oh,
really does it for me.
Oh,
yeah. When he's talking about them getting Twitter pated, and he's walking in the air as if he's dancing. I thought that was hilarious. I'm splitting a gut over here. It's just being Friend Owl, keep running the show, my man. You keep doing that good thing that you're doing, and just. He reminds me of my dad a little bit, too. Just kind of, he walks with his wings behind his back and just kind of he has to be involved, but also is fine that he doesn't know exactly what's going on. But, we'll talk about it as if he knows what's going on.
He does have hey, kids, get off my lawn kind of energy.
He does. Yeah. Which, of course, makes my dad sound like a real old coot, but he's not. He's a lovely person.
We love Peter. Love Peter.
We love
here.
Peter.
Yeah.
Shout out Peter. He'll never listen to this, but shout out, Peter.
So, for the making of this movie, I mean, we covered, you've got to listen to the Dumbo episode because these kind of were made in overlapping times. We covered the animation strike in detail in that episode, so I'm not going to get into it again, but it obviously affected Bambi because that was in production at the same time. It would have actually been more the, like, animation story departments a little bit more as opposed to the, like, final ink and paint teams that were mainly affected on Dumbo. But there was another major production hurdle, a little thing called World War II that definitely had a bigger impact on Bambi.
Bit of a damper.
Yeah. Little tiny historical thing that happened.
Yeah.
In the early 1940s, of course, it's really starting to escalate. Prior to the U.S. involvement of the war, its main effect on the studio was more supply chain issues. Manufacturing on a global scale, even at that point, is just like basically making war materials. So everything else is on back order. They're kind of like limited on what they can have made, what they can have delivered, and all that kind of stuff. After Pearl Harbor and the U.S. joined the war, this was 1941, they actually turned Walt Disney Studios into a military facility. So things kind of really shifted at that point, at which Bambi was one of the main features that was in production. Walt was actually super supportive of this. During the war years, apparently he was basically like, what can we do for the war effort? That was the top priority, putting other things on hold. It was mainly used as a supply depot, and they, put a lot of their feature projects on hold for the time being so that they could make training and service productions that all had to do with the war. The other main effect was, of course, there's a lot of men going off to war. So this meant, similar as it did to, like, all job markets, there's increased opportunity for women all of a sudden.
Ayo.
Yeah. So at this point in the company, the women were still primarily just in the ink and paint department. This allowed a lot of them to try out for other roles as animators, background artists, camera team, even editing. So it's kind of just like they needed people across all areas. So this really opened the door for a lot of them to try their hand, do different things, and get certain jobs, which was really awesome. Bambi had been a slow burn for many years. Get a little bit more into that. But Walt was really determined to finish it with kind of the same level of quality. So it's like just because the war had started, he didn't want to just be like, okay, well, let's just like hurry up, get it done. He didn't want to shelve it. They were far enough along at that point that he really wanted to finish it. They had to go through and take like a hard look and decide, what scenes are we going to cut? So like what's far enough along? How is this looking? What can we cut without, having a major effect on the plot? So they kind of did that like deep dive at that point with the war ramping up.
I am surprised still that it clocked in as long as it was then. If they were looking at, are there ways that we can keep the integrity of like Disney quality, but also finish the film, before the world blows up potentially? Because I expected, sit down, it was like a Dumbo situation. It's like, oh, it's 62 minutes. No, this was like an hour 10. This had like 10 more minutes of animation, which of course when it's hand drawn and hand painted and all of that is an exceptional amount of work. And I was surprised.
I think they were far, like, the stuff that made it in, I think they were far along on that stuff. And I think it was actually intended to be much longer. So this was quite the trim down. Like, there were several scenes cut, and they had to obviously keep, like, continuity, and, like, the story had to still make sense. So it's like, if you're cutting this scene over here, we have to also cut this one, even though we kind of already did that one. So it's just like making those decisions.
I mean, if they had made it with those extra scenes, I know that Walt didn't make this specifically for me, but also he kind of did, because I'm an audience member, and I can tell you that I would have been very disappointed for this movie to be longer. It would have been even lower in the rankings. Actually, can it be lower? Was it at the bottom? Did I put this at the very
I don't
bottom?
think you had it at the very bottom. As I'm sure most people know, Bambi is based on a book called Bambi, A Life in the Woods, and the screen rights of the novel were purchased by Sidney Franklin in 1933, novel by Felix Salten. And he believed that the only way to capture the true spirit of the novel was through animation. So he purchased the rights kind of with this in mind, and then had early conversations with Walt. Now, this is early 1930s. This is even pre-Snow White that they're talking about making an animated feature. So this hadn't even been done yet, and this guy is coming to Walt Disney, bringing this as like a potential first project. So it's something that they wanted to put in development right away. It did spend quite a bit of time there. It took a lot longer than, we talked about Dumbo, just kind of fell into place story-wise. This one, that was not the case. They ran into a lot of hurdles, but Walt was very adamant that they not rush the story process and get this one right.
Well, a lot of the hurdles they ran into is that the original story has like gratuitous violence, sexual conquest, betrayal, blood and guts action by cutthroats and murderers. This is a direct quote. And I just think it's hilarious that Walt's like, but there's something family friendly in here. We got to get that out. We're going to take, I think the bones are good. As Maren Morris sang, if the bones are good, the rest don't matter. And that's really what Walt thought when he looked at this book.
I think it's interesting because I don't totally know, because what I've heard of the book, I don't know how much you know. I did not read it before doing this episode, but I've heard that it's like very much just like a showing of like forest life. It's kind of like a circle of life type thing. So it's like interesting. I'm not sure what would have appealed to them about that.
Like to turn it into an animated film. Yeah, I find that interesting. I mean, to me, based on what I know, because I also must admit I have not read the original novel.
How dare you?
But it gives me similar, based on like what I read, what you read, kind of what they stripped out allegedly from the original book. It gives me Watership Down vibes. Did you ever see that?
I didn't see it.
It's like bunnies literally going to wars if they're people and killing each other. Yeah. And I remember that I watched the animated film. It's like really scrappy animation. Like it's not good, but it was very terrifying. I did not like it. And it sounds like through this novel that's depicting life as it happens in nature, the way that it is described and presented is quite, as I said before, violent.
Yeah. Another reason, I mean, so it was essentially he was debating between like this or Snow White being first. Ultimately, he obviously went with Snow White, and then this was going to be the second feature. But things were just moving slowly across the board. The story wasn't coming together. The animation team in particular was just not quite ready for the complicated anatomy of a deer. There was definitely animals in Snow White in the first three movies altogether, but they were never the main focus, and they generally tended to avoid like a realistic looking four-legged animal because that adds.
They looked like putty.
Yeah. Yeah,
like
exactly.
Gumby.
Yeah, so it's like you couldn't. They weren't ready because like as like a forest character that's like a minor like kind of background character, that's fine. But in these, obviously, the deer are front and center, and you've got to be able to like nail that movement before we make the movie about a deer.
Yes, 100%.
So this also meant that just like not any artist was able to work on this film. So like once they kind of felt like they were at the point where they brought in little baby deer, what are those called? Fawns. They brought in, they brought in fawns. People were studying them. A lot of them were like going to the zoo and like just like watching and sketching and doing all of this. But even with a whole bunch of training, only certain artists were able to actually like nail that believability and like the realistic quality that they were looking for. So it made the production take longer. They were just kind of like moving slowly on this with a smaller team, which is why despite it starting so early, it ended up coming out after, Fantasia, Pinocchio, and Dumbo.
Do you know which of the 9 old men were on this movie?
I know that Frank and Ollie were. Eric Larson was definitely involved.
Because Frank or Ollie, one of them animated Bambi, right?
Yes, I think so.
Did they not?
Yeah. Someone else that was like actually super important on this film was Retta Scott. And at this point, there had been no female animators that had actually worked on any, I believe, like key animation or in-betweening.
Right.
Like if we're talking like pre-war, they were just mainly in the ink and paint department. So she was originally looking to pursue a career in fine arts. A professor suggested that she apply for the Disney Animation Studio role, and she ended up getting a job as a story artist. So she started working on Bambi, and it quickly became apparent that she just had an amazing talent for drawing animals, something that she was really good at. She actually was in charge of boarding the whole scene with the dogs. Like that end climax scene where they're chasing. That's dramatic. Yeah, so she storyboarded that. Apparently, like, everybody was obsessed with it. Like, Walt loved it. Like, Frank and Ollie had amazing things to say about it. And she did such a good job that they actually had her do animation on that scene as well. Love it. She is actually the first female animator with the Disney credit. So that's amazing. That was pretty awesome.
That scene is so cinematic. There's so many different like angles. There's so much action. Like there's a lot happening. So I love hearing that it was a woman.
Yeah.
but also someone who hadn't necessarily had experience doing that sort of like huge scale piece of a project. I think that's one of the coolest things as we learn more about like the women who kind of were trailblazers at Disney, is that they're often the ones that kind of like surprise you. You know, it's like they're people who came from maybe a different background or have different types of experience. And I mean, I think for both of us, I know for me, for sure, in my career, that really resonates with me because it's like I have a very diverse, you know, catalog of experiences that influence what I'm able to bring to a role now. So I mean, it's always wonderful to hear that creative companies like Disney also are able to tap into those different experiences and allow people like a chance to try something else and then for them to succeed.
For sure. I think, you know, we've talked a lot about like, you know, the issues, especially early on. And I mean, like, you know, stuff they're still trying to rectify to this day with getting more diverse voices, you know, in their artistic roles at Disney. But I do feel like you can see early on that it's not something that they were like vehemently opposed to. Like when the right person came along and, you know, showed what they had and they nailed it and, you know, they were like making the pictures better, like that, you know, they got those opportunities. You just weren't like handing them out. You had to really show up and show your stuff and be on point, and then, you know, there was room for you to shine there. Frank and Ollie actually wrote in their book about her, Retta was strong, had boundless energy, and drew powerful animals of all kinds from almost any perspective and any action. No one could match her ability. So she high praise from those guys, especially. The visual style of the picture itself took a lot of different directions over the, you know, many years that it was in development. It really found its footing in the late 1930s when a Chinese artist named Tyrus Wong became involved in the project. So he started at Disney as an in-betweener, which most of them do. And he was actually coming in with a lot of experience in painting, and he heard about the Bambi project. He was super interested in capturing wildlife and like painting and all that kind of stuff. So he actually worked on this project kind of on his own time, doing some just like concept paintings and stuff like that, and then brought them to the art director Tom Kodrick, and then who, you know, loved them and brought them in front of Walt as well, who also loved them. And this was basically like, okay, like we have found our look and what we're going to go for with Bambi when they saw what he had done. So they ended up promoting him to a concept artist. And I mean, a lot of people have said that the concepts that he did for Bambi is really what came through in the final film, which we've talked about before, how like rare that actually is, that fully happens. Like Ivan Earl in Sleeping Beauty is like one of the rare examples where it's like his vision was fully matched all the way through, and that's because he just like Walt gave him all the power to brute force it, and you know, all the money and all the time and all of that. But this is one where gave him everything. Gave him everything, where it's just like the initial art was so strong that it just like really guided the film, and I think that's why it looks beautiful in the way that it does. It had some advantages and disadvantages. The backgrounds were intended to be very simple, which allowed the animation of the main characters to really shine. I mean, we kind of talked about this, like some were very critical of the style in the sense of like, why are we just making a realistic looking deer? Like, why do we need to animate this? Like, if that's what the story is, like, let's just do live action.
Yeah. Get the deer in here. Yeah.
Exactly. But I don't know. I feel like the expression and the art, like for me, ultimately with this film, it's worth it because I feel like they're able to like match a certain element of realism that like makes the fact that this is a deer, like a rabbit talking, like believable in some way. Like you're able to like extend your belief enough to kind of go on the journey with them. And actually, I mean, I care about the characters. I know you kind of said you don't so much, but like for me, overall, the style was very successful and like what they did with the visuals.
And they still exaggerated a bunch of things on these animals. Like I read somewhere that Bambi's head is like the size of his whole body. They called him Little Pumpkinhead when they were animating him. Like
Ruddy Pumpkinhead.
Bambi is cute, okay? I know I'm giving him a tough time and I'm calling him dumb. But like he is really cute. So before we move on, I would like to know, we've talked about the visual style and you think it's successful. Is there a particular scene or shot that really resonates with you then, just so that we can all picture in our heads like kind of what the visual landscape of this film looks like?
I mean, I think the opening and kind of like the closing is really well done.
It's really stunning.
It's, I mean, a very strong use of the multi-plane camera, which we've talked about in our Snow White episode, where they're actually adding a lot of depth to the forest. A 2D painting, but you can tell that like the waterfall is farther away than like these trees, and just like the way that's done. I also love ice skating scene when they're on the ice, and I feel like that's a really good example of there's really like not a lot going on in the backgrounds, but the characters are so captivating, and I think that kind of represents stylistically like what they were going for with this film.
Yeah. And I mean, a huge part of the reason that the visual style works is the soundtrack. You know me, I love a good soundtrack. Yes. So I mean, this is
a good one.
Did I set that up intentionally? I absolutely did. I'm the queen of the segue. So the soundtrack for this film, part of the reason I think it's so exceptional is because it was written in part by the same guy who did Dumbo. So my guy, Frank Churchill, is back to compose the score. This time he's got Larry Morey, come on down, who worked on the lyrics in Snow White. And they also had someone else named Edward H. Plum. Do we know him? No. Do we know him now? Sure. He assisted with the composing. And so these three guys kind of worked together to write all the songs. As a quick dark aside, Churchill actually killed himself while sitting at his piano shortly before this movie came out. Now, the hot Disney goss is that it was rumored that he and Disney didn't get along while making this film. So some people attribute his suicide to those disagreements, it's more likely, I know, it's really dark. Honestly, really dark.
I mean, I don't think that's going to be enough. I mean, that's maybe like, you know, one of the many things that pushes you to the edge to get you to that point. But like, I don't think we can just like blame this on Walt.
Yeah, you're trying to come for my segues here, but essentially, it's more commonly believed that the fact that two of his closest friends, who actually had been members of the Disney orchestra, had died in the previous months and very close together. So he suffered a lot of losses, and so that, plus creative differences, if that was a reason for his depression, kind of all came together, which is a very tragic end because Dumbo, as we discussed in our Dumbo episode, that score is exceptional. It is a really fantastic example of how to use a score to act as almost like another moving backdrop behind animation. And with Bambi, they did the same thing. I think that the songs are less memorable to me in this movie. Like, Walt had the same way that you were describing earlier. You know, he wanted the animation to be exceptional. He wanted the storytelling to be spectacular. He wanted the same thing with the music. Like, he wanted
just do everything perfectly, guys.
Just
like,
do it
come
perfectly,
on,
guys. What's the big deal? It's not that hard. So he wanted the songs to be singable, to have memorable lyrics, like all this type of thing. And I mean, for me, there's only 2 songs of the 4 that I can think of any of the lyrics for. There's only 2. And it would be Love is a Song, which is that opening piece of music. Love is a song.
Nailed it.
So that's one. Gorgeous.
Stunning.
Love that. And then there's also the Drip, Drip, Drop Little April Showers, which is another exceptional.
Iconic.
What's so beautiful about these 2 pieces of music, they were the backbone of the entire score, but they have very similar feels, but they build to different places. So Love is a Song, it's very romantic, it's idyllic, it's very pastoral. It really sets the tone for what the vibe of this film is going to be. It has some real emotion behind it. It feels robust, but it also is approachable and gentle, which you kind of think about, you know, with deer. They're very calm animals, typically. Obviously, we see Bambi go off with that other one, really just like going for it. But most of the time, deer are
majestic.
You know, like I said, majestic, regal even. I mean, he is the great prince of the forest. I mean, this makes perfect sense.
You know what, though? Sorry, random thought.
Oh, please.
Maybe this guy killed himself because he was working on 2 extremely sad Disney animal movies.
I mean, we're really just not giving people a fighting chance here.
Like,
they are sad.
And he's like making this like beautiful sad music. Like, if that doesn't take you to a dark place, I don't know what does.
It is sad, but also it's not, because, okay, for example, with Bambi's theme, which is a theme that repeats over and over again, it starts one way and then evolves throughout the film. So it's a lot of strings and woodwinds, which is just chef's kiss, gorgeous. But as the film starts, it's all innocent and gentle when he's a baby. That makes sense. But then when you hear it throughout the movie, it gets more and more confident and noble throughout the course. So
I love that.
A lot of these pieces of music start sad and get happy, or start happy, get sad. Like, there is a lot of transformation happening, which lends itself really nicely to the fact that the movie is set up with like 4 parts, right? Like the seasons.
Yeah.
So we see it start in, what would that be? Summer, I guess.
Spring?
It starts in summer. Does it start in spring?
I don't know.
We skip summer and go right to fall and winter?
I mean, maybe it's summer. I don't know.
I
always pictured it like spring, like new beginning, but like summer's fine too.
Maybe it's okay. So maybe we're both right.
Yeah.
It definitely ends in spring, because when they're having those twins, ain't no way it's July.
That's why I feel it's like
those.
like, you know, we've come full circle and we're like back where we started.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we agreed to agree. Spring. Spring to spring. Hilarious. But yeah, so it kind of, all this music evolves. It allows us to think about things like changing seasons. It allows us to think of animals getting older, getting stronger, getting wiser, ultimately, in the ways of the world. And I mean, you have Little April Showers in there, like I said, truly iconic. It's like one of the best, most exceptional expressions of music playing with animation that I've ever seen in my life. Every single, like, drop of rain is punctuated with something on the screen, the use of instruments, the use of the choir. It honestly is just...
It's a banger.
If I had to give Bambi a higher grade, it would be for that sequence alone, because I do think it's that exceptional.
Yeah.
And it's pieces of music like that which got it 3 Oscar nominations, including Best Sound Recording, Best Music Original Song, and Best Film Score. They really earned that recognition for this score.
Totally.
And I would like to pay homage to Churchill, Plum, and Maury by reading a quote, from a review of the soundtrack, which says that Churchill, Plum, and Maury masterfully provided a musical narrative abounding with happiness, playfulness, tenderness, and joy for all the cute animals which wormed themselves into our hearts. What was surprising and greatly appreciated was the dynamic, kinetic, and ferocious action writing, which offered 2 tour de force compositions fine enough to support any major non-cartoon film.
Wow.
The whole article, where this is from, I know, it's just, honestly...
high praise.
It's worth every word.
Yeah.
What he said is all accurate. The whole article is worth reading if you are a Disney Score fan. Check out our resources on our Instagram page for this episode in case you would like to discover more of it for yourself. But essentially, what we need to take away from this, Nicole's notes, is that this soundtrack is a banger, okay?
Sure is.
Not necessarily one that you put on in the car and want to fist bump to, but in terms of accomplishing the job, they understood the assignment and they hit it out of the park. Now, they hit it out of the park, but there are a lot of other things that were not quite hit out of the park, or were hit so far out of the park that someone caught the ball, brought it back in, and wanted to have a conversation about it. So let's talk a little bit.
Are you going to rain on my Bambi parade?
Absolutely I am, because you have to. But it's for it's interesting conversations.
All right.
Obviously, when we're preparing for this, I'm usually the one who has prepared less at the time that you're like, are we still on? And I'm always like, haven't started.
I'm like, I noticed the dock is empty, so are we doing this tomorrow or what?
And the answer is always yes. And then I will say, oh, it's probably not going to be much. And then it's much. And in this case, I did not see the much coming. I feel like I should have, now that I've educated myself. I feel like I should have.
I have no idea. I can't wait.
Get ready.
Yeah.
So, Just kind of set it up with some niceties, okay? So a year before the movie came out, Disney was getting smart, and they're like, we got to get people excited about this, okay? We got a war going on. We know that it's going to be tough to sell it overseas with marketing. Like, we just don't have the resources, and also people are busy trying not to die because it's World War II.
And they're, like, Pinocchio and Fantasia lost so much money. They're like...
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. They're like, we really got to focus close to home here.
Yeah.
We got to try to make this happen. So a year before the film came out, they ran this comic book giveaway. They made Bambi into a comic book, and it was distributed through Horlicks Malted Milk and various toy stores.
Are these still around? Like, can I get this collector's comic book?
Or Horlicks Malted Milk?
Both, obviously.
I mean,
the
you
comic.
could probably find the comic book on eBay or something. I'm going to guess it's not very good. Like, I feel like it wouldn't have been
but I kind of
what
want
we
it.
expect now. Well, I mean, we'll go to eBay, check it out. If anyone loves Lish enough to get it for her, please feel free. I clearly don't. I'm out here looking for the mugs you need for your collection. That's really still my priority.
Yeah,
so
fair.
If someone else would like to get you the Bambi comic, feel free. So they started trying to kind of like plant the seed, get some, like, whet the appetites of the American public with this. Mm-hmm. And then they also actually started a Sunday comic strip that began running in newspapers on the 19th of July, 1942, a month before the release, and then it actually continued all the way to the 4th of October. So it ran for like a couple months. Every week they had a different piece of the comic come out, which is kind of fun. And ultimately they had a lot of other merchandise, obviously immediately after, but then following, because Bambi picked up traction with the general public. Like, the general public liked it. It was a commercial success. You know, it made just over $2 million, and then through overseas marketing down the road, re-releases, all that stuff, it made $300 million by 1988, which is like quite a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money. People were into it, and actually people were so into it that shortly after the film and the first, you know, that forest fire sequence came out, the Wartime Council used Bambi and his friends to in a national poster campaign to promote fire prevention. He was replaced by Smokey Bear not even 1 year later, but you know what? Bambi really tried to do the people some good, okay?
Yeah.
Bambi really came in here and said, you know what? I am going to be recognized by the American Film Institute as the 3rd best animated film in history. Watch out, world. And I will be an advocate for preventing forest fires.
3rd out of, like, how many at that point? Like,
I have no idea. I mean, I think this is a current ranking. Like, Bambi is currently 3rd. Snow White is 1st. I could not be bothered to find out who number 2 is. If it's Dumbo, I will laugh, but it's definitely not. I feel like if it was a Disney movie, this article where I found this information would have told me the Disney film. So it must be some, like, it's like Book of Kells or something, probably, you know, something like that.
Okay, no, that makes more sense, because, like, at that point, there was probably, like, 10 features.
Exactly. So it's kind of like, what does this mean?
Yeah.
No, this is a more, like, recent
Got it.
ranking.
Okay.
And I mean, based on what we've already discussed in terms of the animation achievement, the storytelling, and the soundtrack, this does make sense. It's the perfect ingredients for people to love it.
Yeah.
However, as we already alluded to earlier, critical reception was mixed. Like, you know, the fact that it wasn't that fantastical was seen as a flaw. But Disney did do a fairly good job of staying true to deer ecology. Like, for example, deer don't mate for life. So the fact that the great prince of the forest is, like, never around makes perfect sense, because he actually wouldn't be.
Okay.
Similar to that, the fact that Bambi wasn't with Feline at the birth of the twins also makes sense.
Yeah.
He wouldn't be there. He would be off, you know, doing his own thing. And even stripping trees for bark, like for food in the winter, again, that is something that deer do.
Right.
So that's great. On top of that, Bambi's mother's death became, like, the hot button topic. You're right. Everyone's talking about it. Everyone's like, this is, like, the scene everyone's talking about. People still talk about it now. There's a lot of, you know, sketches and jokes and parodies of this because it was so impactful. A lot of people can recall seeing it for the first time and finding it extremely traumatizing or frightening.
Going vegan.
Oh my goodness, going vegan. I mean, Stephen King, as, like, the world's most prolific horror writer, thinks it's one of the scariest things he's ever seen. He saw it as a child in theaters.
Oh, wow.
And was like, wow. So it's been very impactful.
Yeah.
And honestly, Disney did us real dirty with that. Do you know that originally Bambi was going to be the one who, like, saw the new grass in the spring? But Walt decided, no, Bambi needs to be totally dependent on his mother and pathetic. So he's going to be completely helpless and a dodo. And he isn't going to find the grass. The audience is going to feel really bad for him because his mom's about to die. So Bambi can't do anything on his own. Sorry, he needs to suffer a little bit. So Disney, I don't know what you doing. He also wanted to kill the mother on screen. And other people were like, you absolutely cannot do that. And he said, well, I could. And they're like, don't. And he said,
I feel like it's almost worse when you, like, don't see it sometimes. You know? Because then you just, like, your imagination runs away with you, at least that for me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, so then arguably he did us the dirtiest of all.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like he really did say, I'm going to come in here and try to scare the living daylights out of everyone. And I mean, at this point, between Snow White with the hag, we got Pinocchio with boys turning into donkeys, we've got Mrs. Jumbo being separated from Dumbo, and now we have Bambi's mom dying. Walt really doesn't want kids to enjoy his movies. There were a lot of parents who, when this movie came out, were like, I can't take my kids to see these movies anymore. This is too damaging. Kids are screaming, kids are crying, kids are upset.
But they're, like, still doing that, though. Like, it's like we're just killing off parents, like, right, left, and center. Like, it's like a Disney thing now.
One critic did, like, comment years later. This is not, like, a recent, like, oh, Bambi just came out and a critic had this to say. But, you know, they said that movies designed expressly for children are the ones that scare them the most because it's going to reflect what their deepest fears are, right? In this case, losing a parent is the scariest thing you can imagine when you're a child. So you're telling me that's why Dumbo's so upsetting for a lot of children. That's why a lot of these stories have orphans in them. You want your audience, if they are primarily children, to be rooting for the main character.
Sure.
So let's make them suffer. Let's take away their parents and their friends and their families, and then let's let them overcome. How triumphant. How joyful. So like the mom dying, that was upsetting, but this spurred a lot more drama than I think Disney was necessarily anticipating, and it still has ripple effects today. So Bambi's mom dies. People are upset, and they're upset enough to start really going off on people who hunt, right? Hunting has never been a thing that 50% of the population really loves. I mean, I don't know, but I think I do know about you. We don't love it. Not a big fan.
Absolutely not.
Now that it is no longer a necessity for getting food, the fact that it is a sport, I have a tough time with personally. Like I'm a Mennonite, so we're pacifists. We don't believe in war or violence, but also it just feels unnecessary to me. Like, I
love animals like way too much to like. Yes, I do eat them, but I could not just shoot one myself.
No,
unless I like had to survive. For some reason.
Right, exactly. So because that kind of need for hunting as necessity, as a way of preserving life for humans has been removed, a lot of people started really calling for bans of hunting. And at the same time then, hunters are seeing this as an ideological threat. They are very, very, very insulted by this movie and what it implies about people who use guns to kill animals, whether for sport. And to be clear as well, part of their outrage comes from the fact that they have licenses to do so, right? It's like there are regulations that you can follow as a gun owner or someone who wants to hunt. Like I have friends who hunt, right? It's not my vibe. I would never go with them, but they are hunting legally. Like there are ways to do it legally. However, people saw Bambi's mom get shot and were like, absolutely not my Bambi.
And the hunters are very clearly like the villains in this story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. So when the movie came out, there were a bunch of hunting advocates who were calling for Disney to correct this slur, quote unquote, against hunters. They wanted like official apologies and all this. And Disney responded that it's like, well, you sportsmen were not the target. Actually, the original story was about German hunters. So if you're a German hunter, no apologies. If you're an American hunter, it's fine. We're not talking to you, which of course is insane. It's insane.
I mean, I'm assuming that's just like to do with the fact that the war was going on.
100%. The original story was viewed as an allegory about World War II, like Nazis, right? So a lot of people interpret the original text as man being Nazis and the forest creatures being everyone else.
Wasn't it written before World War II?
Yes, it was. So people started applying that text to what was happening in the world when this movie came out, when they found out that the movie was based on a book. Do you know what I mean? Like, it kind of started...
But, like, the book couldn't have been based on that.
Well, but like, Nazism was already a political movement, I believe, when the book was published. Now people are going to come for me if my history's wrong. But Nazism was around before World War II. So... It could be that the author was like, well, I do have a certain man whose last name begins with H in mind when I write about this character. And I mean, the book was banned in a lot of countries.
Oh, interesting. Okay,
well.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Honestly, so many things I've learned about Bambi that you didn't think it could be a controversial subject.
No.
And yet here we are.
Here we are.
So hunters are mad. Other people are mad. Disney's supposed to apologize. They're saying, maybe we won't. Hunters are being encouraged to go and like protest anti-hunting protesters. Like, honestly, stuff is getting wild. And the bigger issue that I find most fascinating about this is that Bambi as a film inspired this greater sense of environmentalism and environmental activism, which you think is great, but it's through a very one-dimensional lens that a lot of environmental experts are saying is a problem, because the Disney version of Bambi veers very far from the original story. We alluded to this earlier. The original book has hunters in it as a problem, but so are other animals. The original story has animals eating other animals. It has Bambi watching like a ferret eat a bird and be like, Mother, should we eat birds? And she's like, no, we don't do that. Do you know what I mean? Like, it addresses the fact that there's predators, there's prey, animals can starve to death. Like,
circle of life.
The fact that Bambi and his mom have to eat bark it's a circle of life. The fact that they had to eat bark in the winter, deer experts would say, probably a bunch of the herd died. Right? Like, we're seeing them survive, but like others would have died because there's not enough food. So a lot of ecologists are saying this movie is artistically elegant and ecologically shallow, which honestly, beautiful quote, very condemning, very much saying this is not it. So instead of affirming nature and the relationship humans have with it, it becomes this weird, ironically, a fantasy of nature because it doesn't include animals eating each other. Or the fact that, like, we don't know anything about these humans. What if the humans were hunting because they needed to eat the animals? Like, we're eliminating the possibility that people actually weren't just trying to, like, kill all the animals in sight, because the movie's told through the lens of these animals. And
very true.
As a result, it means that Bambi has made it impossible for humans not to be seen as a destroyer or purely evil in this fantastical, ideological kind of Garden of Eden vibe that they've created. So without knowing anything about the motivations for the humans that are seen in this movie, it paints it as impossible for humans and nature to coexist, which is very dangerous as an ideology. It doesn't make any sense. That's not how the world works. And it means that humans and animals are either always at odds and trying to kill each other, or they're always at harmony, which also just doesn't work. It's this idealized paradise that makes no sense, which ultimately leads me to my final point, which is the Bambi effect. Have you heard of the Bambi effect?
I haven't. You know what that is? No, I actually don't.
Okay. Once I tell you what it is, you're going to be like, oh, I know what this is. Okay. So you actually alluded to it earlier when you said you don't want to shoot a baby deer, but you will eat meat.
Yes.
This is essentially the Bambi effect, where it highlights the disparity between objecting to killing cute and adorable animals like deer, but not really caring about mass slaughter of less desirable animals like pigs or cows. So for vegetarians and vegans, this movie also has been kind of damaging in a very, very quiet, underground, subconscious way, where people don't see the difference, right? Like, they don't see that they're setting a distinction between types of animals. So for vegetarians, it's kind of like, how am I supposed to speak the same language as these people who see them as fundamentally different types of animals, right? And then on top of that, there's just, so honestly, it's like a gift that keeps on giving, all these different layers of environmental impact here, because other people would then say, like, other ecologists are like, there are populations of deer that are overpopulated that we need to thin out, like, for their sake, because they're all going to starve. But the Bambi effect means people freak out when someone is like, hey, this herd of deer is actually 3 times the size it should be. We actually do need to thin them out for their own good and for the sake of the herd moving forward. And people are like, no. And
because we're one of their predators in the great circle of life.
Because we have moved into their ecosystems, we now are partly responsible, from an ecologist view, we are partly responsible for making sure then that they have enough food within that environment. Exactly. And if there are too many deer and not enough food, you gotta take care of it. You gotta help them out, because they can't help themselves. They're not gonna start eating each other. This is not Lord of the Flies with deer. So, they're not gonna do that. So, and then it's this just weird cyclical between a rock and a hard place, because ironically, the movements to thin the overpopulations of deer are shot down, pun fully intended with the shot down, which means that they're inadvertently killing deer. So it's
Right.
just this very, honestly, such a convoluted mess. Fascinating moral and ethical issue, though, because it has meant Bambi is a movie that people are still talking about as having a significant cultural impact, but it's not as obvious an impact as movies like Princess and the Frog or even Dumbo, like we talked about last time, right? Where like the issues are more glaring.
I feel like not intended. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like Disney wasn't necessarily going into making this movie with this intention of this certain cultural impact. This is just something that like, kind of happened. Everyone got attached to this deer and now we have a problem.
Exactly. I think Disney went slightly too far. Disney himself, I'm going to say, because he made the decisions about the story. I think he stripped out like one too many elements of the original story that now have made it this kind of catch-22 where, yes, you've won audiences over to this deer, which is amazing, but you also have robbed Bambi's environment of being at all realistic, which means it's this idealized nature which just can't exist,
it's
right?
Like an
it doesn't
Eden type thing, and it like shows like the violent nature only from one perspective.
Correct. And it really does demonize then those people who are, like I mentioned earlier, hunting with a license. Like it's great to have conversations around, the ethics and morality of hunting in general, but it is not a good idea for any side to crucify that group of people who do it technically legally, right? Like they're not breaking any rules. But I mean, all that to say, some activists are still in favor of this film because at least it is having people ask the questions. It's starting conversations, and it's and it's endearing people to nature that maybe they've ignored, right? And I think I'd like to leave this surprisingly heavy conversation with a lovely quote, which says that animated films have the potential for putting us in touch with issues in playful forms that can allow audiences to think as well as to feel. I mean, Bambi, you might be close to the bottom of my list, but like that's a mic drop, bro. That's a good way to end there.
Well, Kirbs, another day, another apology, and I have a doozy this week, one that I actually feel really, really bad about. So when I was doing some research after the fact, I was learning more about Tyrus Wong, who I talked about in this episode. He was super influential in terms of like the look and the style and everything for Bambi. And they only credited him as a background artist in the original film, which I did not realize. It was not until many, many years later, and the guy was in his 90s, when they finally acknowledged that he was a crucial part of this film the style and everything, which is just devastating. Definitely some racist stuff going on there, which is just like so upsetting in so many levels. I just feel so bad I didn't catch this going into the episode.
I mean, that's something worth apologizing for. Yes. And I mean, I was going to apologize for all the heavy themes that I talked about, but honestly, I think yours is worse. I think that is taking the cake here on the heavy themes of Bambi and the making of. I would like to apologize for a much less serious thing, but how unclear I was about the fact that this film clearly starts in the spring. As you pointed out, Little April showers. Showers in April.
Giveaway.
April is the spring, and yet I wasn't sure what time of year this started. I really dropped the ball on that one. I feel like I was fairly obvious, and I'm sure there were many listeners at home listening to me ramble on about this and trying to figure out how I could be such a dum-dum. I called Bambi a bumbling baby. And I feel like I really, in this moment, am the bumbling baby. So while I won't apologize to Bambi, I will apologize for being the dumbest boy in school, once again, for something so very obvious.
Little obvious, but all good. All good. Happens to the best of us.
I guess. And the rest of us.
Yeah. And the rest of us. And of course, we have some incredible sources that we want to thank. I read a very cool D23 article about Retta Scott. That was really awesome. I also have my classic 2 books that I always reference, which is The Walt Disney Film Archives by Daniel Cawthon-Sluth and Ink and Paint, The Women of Disney's Animation by Mindy Johnson.
Always a classic. Never gets old hearing you list those 2 off.
Love them.
I have quite a few sources that I used for this particular episode, but the ones I would like to highlight starts with the music article called Bambi, Frank Churchill and Edward H. Plum by Craig Lysey. This is the article I mentioned earlier in the episode that in case you're interested in soundtracks, this is one to check out, and it was written for Movie Music UK. I also read another couple articles about all the problems with Bambi. The first was called The Problematic Influence of Disney's Bambi by Matthew Wills for JSTOR Daily. I read another one called How Bambi Hoodwinked American Environmentalists, not to get too melodramatic, but that one was by Robin L. Murray and Joseph K. Human for What It Means to Be American. And finally, I'd like to shout out the article titled The Trouble with Bambi, Walt Disney's Bambi and the American Vision of Nature by Ralph H. Lutz for the Forest and Conservation History.
Those all sound like real bummers.
Everything I talked about in this episode was a bummer. Like, I really feel like I covered the soundtrack, I guess, was a high point, but even that really led into all the negative stuff. So definitely a heavy one for me. This one.
Unexpectedly heavy one for sure.
Unexpectedly.
Yeah. And if you're looking for more shenanigans like these, make sure to subscribe to the Scenario D podcast wherever you love to listen. Better yet, why not rate us? Those stars go a long way.
We are also super excited to be bringing you all of the facts, feels, and chaos over on YouTube. You can now support us by liking, subscribing, ringing the notification bell, and doing everything else you'd normally do for a channel you love. So go watch our latest episode using the link in this episode's description.
And as always, don't forget to catch us on Instagram at Scenario D Podcast. You are going to love the magic we're making there.